Welcome. I am Louis Rickey, Executive Director of the Indiana Arts Commission. I am sitting in my home office today. I'm an older white male, and I have a lovely contemporary quilt behind me and some nice sunny windows. Today we're talking about unemployment from an attorney's point of view, whether you're navigating the unemployment universe as an individual or employer. Our guest, Scott Wiley, has some answers for you. And if he doesn't have answers, at least he's got good jokes. So anyhow, Scott represents a new important resource for artists and small arts organizations, pro bono legal services. His organization is called Indiana Lawyers for the Arts, and he'll talk a little more about it in a moment. Paige and Scott, please introduce yourselves and give an audio description of your appearance for anyone participating with vision or blindness. Paige and Scott.
Thank you, Louis. I am Paige Sharp, and I'm the Deputy Director of Programs for the Indiana Arts Commission. Excited to be here today, and I'm glad that you can join us. I'm a white woman in my early 50s, let's be clear, with brownish blonde hair and a tan top with some fabulous reading glasses in a gray room. It sounds a little sullen, but it's not. We are broadcasting live through Facebook, and this webinar is going to be recorded, and it will be posted on Facebook as well as on our website. If you want to refer back to it, you can go to our website at www.in.gov/arts and look under trainings. You can also check out our website for artists for more information about unemployment. Same website, in.gov/arts/artists. And that's a great resource for a variety of information for artists. So I highly encourage you to visit it. We have plenty of time to answer your questions today, but please put them in the chat box so that Scott can help you, and I will help make sure he answers those questions at the end. But be sure not to include any personal information so that we just want to focus on whatever question we can help you out with. So Scott, as you introduce yourself, if you wouldn't mind telling a little bit more about the Volunteer for the Attorneys for the Arts, that'd be great. Thank you.
Great. It's so nice to have everybody here. And if anybody's back from any of the other webinars we've been doing on legal issues, welcome back. My name's Scott Wiley. I am the Executive Director of Pro Bono Indiana, and we are the organization that is organizing the Lawyers for the Arts, our Indiana branch of that, which will eventually be its own standalone 501c3 nonprofit organization that will allow lawyers in the state of Indiana, through our rather unique pro bono delivery system that we have in Indiana, to assist individuals who are low income and who do not have access to the ability to hire counsel to deal with simple legal issues. For those of you lucky enough to be able to afford a lawyer, I'm sure we'll also be able to refer you on to someone who's an arts lover to help you with your legal matters. In the invitation for today's seminar and in the other communications for this legal series of webinars that we have done, there's information on when you can call to do an intake if you're looking for individualized assistance. That's done on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Central Time, which is 10 to noon in the Eastern Time Zone. And that information again is in the invitation to today's webinar, and we'll be happy to try to get you some assistance. My hope today, however, is to get you enough information on unemployment and then related issues of employment law that are being affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, and that you won't need to call, that we will instead get you what you need in order to successfully navigate the world, or at least put your mind at ease that, that what you're doing is okay. In addition to the wonderful resource that Paige just mentioned, which is on the Indiana Arts Commission's website for individual artists, there is also a really good information that's maintained regularly with all the changes, because what you're going to see with unemployment, it's been changing on a weekly basis, which is also on the state's website. But instead of arts, afterwards you do DWD, which is for the Department of Workforce Development. And that is the actual portal where you apply for unemployment insurance and assistance here in Indiana. One of the things that I will say is when you get to that website, there is a misleading statement that begins it, which it says it's filing as easy as 1, 2, 3. Well, filing may be that easy, but understanding where things are right now can be not so easy. So don't get worried if it's confusing or that you aren't quite up to date or know things. That's where everyone is. And I want to give the state a lot of credit. The reality is when the pandemic hit, our state employees, as you noted, I think Paige just indicated that she was speaking to you from a room in her home. Mr. Ricky, who's the head of the Arts Commission, is talking to you from his home office. Many of us have been working remotely, which makes it much more difficult to access some of the materials and things that we need to do our jobs. So when this pandemic hit and our unemployment rate went from approximately 3.5% to somewhere in the neighborhood of 13 to 15% in many areas, and sometimes a little higher in some areas of our state, the infrastructure to deliver unemployment benefits didn't get any bigger. So it was kind of like the swimming pool was the same size, but instead of having 50 children visit, we had 7,000 children visit. So there just wasn't much room in the pool, and it was hard to get in, and it was hard to get things done. That wasn't anyone's fault. It just was what it was. So as they have built the system and as they have added capacity, things have gotten much better. But many of you may have questions. Your question may be, I applied a long time ago. I've not heard. Or I applied a long time ago and I've not received. Or I've applied a long time ago and they haven't been able to tell me the exact amount. Those are actual regular problems that have come from the delays caused by the lack of capacity for people to review these cases, analyze these cases, make decisions on these cases, while also communicating all that to both the employer and the employee. So just know it's frustrating, it's challenging, and if you're dependent on these resources, it can also be very scary. So just know you're not alone. Everyone's trying very hard to make the system work as much as it can. So unemployment insurance in our system is actually a kind of a remnant of the New Deal and the Great Society of the 1960s, where we tried to make sure that when people became unemployed for reasons beyond their control, there would be some type of bridge financial assistance paid through insurance. This is not a welfare program. This is paid through insurance that is paid for by you and your employer, for those of you who are eligible, to provide that bridge until you can become reemployed. Because of that, in the past, unemployment insurance did not cover everyone. And in fact, it covered a relatively small number of Americans and Hoosiers. And it was usually based on people that had pretty traditional workplace relationships. Folks who worked for an employer in an employee relationship. Left out of that were independent contractors, certain type of farm workers, and any number of other individuals that are self-employed or work for themselves, which includes, unfortunately, a very large percentage of artists whom are self-employed or represent themselves. So in the past, unemployment insurance hasn't always been available to all Hoosiers or to those of us. When this pandemic hit, the federal government, along with all of the state governments in the United States, knew we had to do something. Unfortunately, what we did at the time is we made the error of thinking that this pandemic would be over in a few months. So most of the benefits and improvements to unemployment were only scheduled through July 30th, or 31st, the end of July of this year, with the idea that that's all we needed. By then, everything will be under control and everything will be back to normal. So that really hasn't turned out to be the case. So I wanted to go over where everything was. So when you lose your job, for a reason that is not of your cause. So if you are laid off for economic reasons, if you are furloughed because the factory closes because of the fact that you can't have social distancing appropriately, when you lose your employment for a cause that is not your own, you will typically be eligible for unemployment aid. In this case, the federal government then expanded and added to that aid, and I want to go over that. So first, Indiana unemployment insurance has the general limitation that you have to be eligible for unemployment and you have to be covered by unemployment insurance. Your employer would know that. If you're a self-employed artist or you're an independent contractor or you have some type of other relationship and you don't pay into the system and your employer does not do it on your behalf, in the past you probably weren't eligible for unemployment. And in Indiana, unemployment amounts range based on the income that you had at the time you lost your position and several quarters before that, can run anywhere from a minimum of $50 per week to a maximum benefit of $390 per week. So it's not a set amount. It's actually based on your application on what your income had been. When the pandemic hit, the federal government added to that a benefit of up to $600 per week for individuals that qualified under the CARES Act and the enhancement to unemployment insurance that was part of that law. What that meant is there were many people, new people, they included independent contractors, sole practitioners, and almost everyone who didn't qualify for Indiana coverage could qualify for the federal pandemic unemployment insurance. That added up to an additional $600. Many people only received the federal benefit. And that federal benefit ran basically from the end of March through the end of July. If you were eligible and if you received that $600, that ended the week of July 25th under our unemployment system. So now, at the present time, the only unemployment that is available is the Indiana only. So we're back to the old rules, and we are back to the old amounts of $50 to $390 until a few weeks from now, and we don't know what a few weeks from now means, but President Trump has authorized the use of Fema Funds, Federal Emergency Management Agency disaster funds, to supplement unemployment benefits. In order to receive that supplement, which is up to $300, so it is half what the previous pandemic amount was allocated by Congress, to receive that additional $300, the state has to agree to also chip in $100 of that. So in order for that program to move forward, the state of Indiana has to allocate funding necessary to pay $100 toward the unemployment benefit. The state is referring to that as the Lost Wage Assistance Program. And if you visit the Department of Workforce Development's website, you will note they indicate they hope to have decisions on that within the next 2 to 3 weeks. You'll also notice that it will be dependent on funding on how long and how much that program will provide. But there is a possibility that for individuals who are qualified for the federal pandemic assistance, that addition will partially come back in a few weeks, but only to the degree that Indiana can afford to supplement and participate in that program. It is highly anticipated, but probably not until September or perhaps October, that the federal government may again pass a second pandemic stimulus bill like the CARES Act. And if they do, Congress is likely to include new pandemic unemployment insurance, and most of the legislation that has been proposed in both houses of Congress would indicate that that would likely last till the end of the year. So again, right now we're back to nothing from the federal government. There's the potential that some of that money that President Trump has authorized administratively, combined with whatever Indiana can afford and allocate itself, may temporarily add some of that pandemic back. And eventually there may be more pandemic that would leave Indiana without having to do the supplement so that it could be more broad-based. So literally the amount of unemployment insurance, where it is coming from, who is paying it, is changing from week to week. But right now, if you are currently unemployed, you will be left with only the Indiana-only base amount until either the new lost wages program begins or there's a new passage of a pandemic supplement at the federal government level. So that's why it's so confusing. You apply for it, however, and all this good information on the Indiana Arts Commission's website helps you with a lot of the information, the DWD portion of the state's website, the portal to go in. Many people experience difficulty getting into that portal initially. I had lots of people that I was working with that were going on literally at 12:01 in the morning, hoping to be able to sneak in before the system crashed and was overwhelmed. Many people were very frustrated that they would make it 3/4 or 80 or 90% through all the things they had to certify and do every week. And it is a weekly process. You have to recertify every week, indicating that you're still looking for work. And so there are a lot of frustration that it has gotten much, much better. So once you apply and eventually are approved, then you receive that while you are unemployed. But there are a couple of things that can happen during that I wanted to go over. First of all, what if my employer questions whether I'm eligible? I say I was let go because of COVID-19. My employer says I was let go because I didn't come to work. Both you and the employer have the right to contest your unemployment, because the person that will end up paying the additional cost of your employment insurance will, of course, be your former employer or employers. Sometimes if you've changed jobs within the last 4 quarters, you can actually end up costing a couple of different employers for the cost of your benefits. Because of that, employers have the right to challenge whether you are eligible or not. That challenge has to be, and by the way, the employer has the burden on that. They have to prove it. The belief is that you, when you apply, you do not have the burden to prove that you were fired for cause or that the reason you are no longer employed was your fault. It's the employer obligation to do this. So this is one of the few systems that is employee friendly versus employer friendly. That's just the standard that they have to meet. So you do have the risk, if your employer questions whether you're eligible or not, that it will A, delay it, and B, that you'll have to go through an administrative process to determine whether or not you are in fact eligible. So those are some of the big pieces of this. So first, am I eligible? There's a lot of great resources in determining that. Almost everyone was eligible for the federal pandemic, but that's now over. But there are smaller numbers of people are eligible when it's just Indiana only. That new program the state has put together isn't put together yet, so I really can't answer everything about that, but you want to go to those websites regularly to keep up with what's happening. And when you do apply, you'll do it through the portal on the DWD site, and then that's where all the administrative action occurs. A lot of times people perceive that because it's an administrative process, they perceive that there are legal issues as part of this. There really aren't, unless you are denied and you are denied inappropriately. That can be a legal appellate issue. But for the most part, what you're dealing with is you're just dealing with a great big old website with a lot of poor people on the back end trying their best to process all this paper. And it's a real challenge. So a lot of times, they haven't processed it within the statutory limit period of time. Well, that's because they haven't processed anything in the statutory period of time because we're in a pandemic. It's an unusual circumstance. So, I have found that kindness and courtesy goes a long way. But you do want to check regularly. And I always suggest, if you are having to deal with this yourself, that it may be helpful, especially because of the nature of the state's website. If you have limited Wi-Fi capability in your home or you're not hardwired, you may very well want to go to a library or another source with really good internet, because sometimes you do not want to end up with getting dropped halfway through your certification and everything, because it is just a very, very busy website, unfortunately. And it will cycle up and down in terms of busy based upon what the federal government does as adding that supplement. Second new supplemental money for the Fed comes in, you have this whole other group, independent contractors, like many of our artists, and many of them trying to suddenly get back on the system after being out for a while. So know those frustrations. Just a bit of word to if any of you represent an arts organization or you're an employer, just to mention, many of our arts employers are nonprofit corporations. Many of them are small, and many of them do not contribute or pay in to the unemployment system, effectively self-insured for unemployment costs. Our employees typically are eligible, especially for the pandemic, regardless of their employment relationship with us, especially with the federal programs if they come back. Many of our employees will be eligible, and you may end up with some additional cost charged to you because your employees have to go on unemployment. The Federal CARES Act was drafted in a way that nonprofit arts organizations will not be responsible for any cost that the federal government authorized for additional pandemic insurance expense. So while you may get dinged a bit by the state for your portion of providing that unemployment benefit to your employees, you will not be held responsible for any of the cost of the additional, more generous benefits offered by the federal government. And that's a great thing, because that would be a real burden for a lot of employers if they had to be responsible for the increase in insurance and other costs because of that. Now, a couple of words about unemployment insurance. If your employer questions your eligibility, you may want to be real careful on spending your unemployment benefits, because if they eventually determine that you were in fact ineligible and you got any of them, there is the potential they may try to claw some of them back. That is a legal issue. Another one you want to worry about is most unemployment benefits are taxable as income. And while there will be some deductions and things because of COVID-19 under the CARES Act when we rewrite the tax filing laws for next year, the reality is for some of your Indiana-based benefits, if you receive them, and we're not even sure about the federal benefits because the legislation is kind of being written as the airplane is flying, you do have the potential that this could cause an increase in your tax liability for 2020. Now, you won't be paying that, of course, until you do your taxes next spring or summer, but you don't want to get shocked with a great big giant tax bill. If you're one of those folks that are used to getting a big tax refund, you don't want to get shocked and find out instead of getting $1,100 back, suddenly you're going to owe $800. So you may also want to look at, if you have tax software that you used last year, or if you have a tax provider, if you go to H&R Block or you've got an accountant that you work with, you may want to talk to them to see whether or not you want to hold a bit of your money back to make sure you have sufficient resources to pay your taxes. So that's some of the basics of unemployment. So right now, if you're unemployed or you have been unemployed recently, go to the DMD portal, look at the resources that are available to you through the Indiana Arts Commission, employment, all the things for artists that are there. There's wonderful resources. You apply weekly. If you receive benefits, be sure you're smart with those benefits and that you follow the rules to maintain your eligibility, which requires you to, of course, try to find work. Now, some questions that I wanted to address in terms of this, a couple of them. And one is, what if my employer wants me to come back to work and I don't want to go back to the meatpacking factory where everyone has COVID? Many of us are scared to return to the workforce. Many of us are working from home. I have lots of friends who have elderly relatives, or they themselves have compromised immune systems or other underlying conditions, or their little 7-year-old has asthma, and they're scared to death. What you'll be doing, and by the way, I just saw a clarification that you don't apply for unemployment insurance weekly. You have to go back on weekly to recertify that you're still unemployed and still need help. Thank you to whoever put that in the thing. But if you're invited to go back to work, it's a real tough decision, because one of the things in that certification you do every week is you will be dealing and saying whether or not your employer has been willing to have you back to work. And unfortunately, there's not a real good answer for that, because if you are reoffered employment, you're supposed to take it. And if you don't take it, it's considered basically you're quitting. And so the reason you lost your job no longer is your employer furloughing you and letting you go, it's you refusing to return to work. Right now, that would probably disqualify you from Indiana employment benefits. It may or may not have cost you the pandemic benefit that it was given by the federal government that went through July 31st. And it may or may not limit your ability to get the new supplement if that is eventually approved and funded by Indiana. But it is a real tough thing. So you're just going to have to use your judgment on whether something, we have had a lot of teachers, we've had a lot of other people in many employment arenas that have made the choice to give up their employment and give up their job for worrying about the health or safety of their family or themselves or others. So, it's a really tough decision, and I can't guide you on it beyond letting you know that the legal implication of not returning to work is the potential loss of unemployment benefits. So I just want to do a few more minutes on some related things, and then we'll be happy to take some questions and give you additional guidance. The first thing is related employment rights that have been increased or improved because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Many of you are familiar with things like the Family Medical Leave Act, sick leave, vacation leave, other things that many of us are lucky enough to have at our employer. I'm very lucky. I have employer-based health insurance. I have vacation. I have paid sick leave that's available. My employer is large enough that I have access to the Family Medical Leave Act. So for many of us, those tools are available if we have a family member that develops COVID, or if we ourselves have COVID, that we don't lose our jobs, we don't lose our income, and we don't lose benefits. So in this pandemic, we knew that there'd be a lot of people that weren't so lucky, that work in jobs that don't have paid sick leave, that don't have vacation, and that if you don't go to work, you don't get paid. And that's many of our artists. Many of our artists, if they're not on the boardwalk doing the caricature, if they're not singing at the wedding, if they're not selling their art at the gallery or the farmer's market, they don't get paid. And so what the federal government did in the CARES Act is expanded the protection for individuals that might face COVID-19 related issues to make sure that you didn't come to work sick. None of us wants you to come to work sick and make us sick as well, or other people ill. So what we have is there are new paid leave entitlements under the CARES Act. These will run until the end of December of this year, may be extended. And so there are increased availability. Employers covered under the CARES Act, which is almost everybody. It's literally almost all of our employers. So if you are paid by an employer, they are required to provide you up to 2 additional weeks of paid sick leave. It's not paid completely. It ranges based on income and other things, but a portion of your sick leave pay, up to all of it, depending on how much you receive in terms of your general income, up to 80 hours or 2 weeks of additional sick leave designed to allow you to stay home. If you have COVID or you have a relative that you are caring for in your household, your husband or wife, your partner, your mom, your dad, your kid. provides you that additional leave. Part-time employees are allowed a percentage based on their part-time. So if you're a half-time employee that works 20 hours a week, you could get up to 40 hours of additional part-time. And basically, eligible employees are folks who are in the private sector who are employed by an employer with fewer than 500 employees. And then certain public sector employers are eligible as well, but your public employees will have much better guidance from their folks. So to qualify for this additional leave, what you basically have to do is you've either been subject to local quarantine or isolation because of COVID-19, meaning you've been exposed. You've been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine, usually because you've gotten a positive test. You've experienced symptoms of COVID-19 and have sought medical care, but you have not yet perhaps received the outcome of your test. Or if you are caring for an individual that's described in those first two, which is they've either been diagnosed or they're subject to quarantine. Or you're caring for a child that has been quarantined. This is going to be probably the one that we'll most use this fall as our schools go back in session, because of the fact that we are most likely, as you know, the rate of infection amongst those from 0 to 19 has gone from virtually nothing early in the pandemic, which really affected older individuals like myself. But now we have a very high percentage, as many in some of our counties, as many of half of our cases are people 40 and under. And we have a high increase in the number of our children. And of course, children are much less likely to become ill, but they can transmit the illness to others. So because of that, they will be required to be quarantined for a period of time and be home from school. And so if that happens, this additional employee benefit will be available to you if you're with a qualified employer. And then a couple other things to mention that we may not have thought about. When we started this pandemic and I thought about the unemployment issues and the employer-employee related issues, I never thought family law would be something I would discuss in the context of unemployment insurance. But I'm going to briefly, just to flag it for some of you, especially if these circumstances deal with you. You can be facing a change in your tax filing status. And many of us, especially those of us who are divorced or who have a child that was born outside of a marriage, many of us have rules that we deal with those family relationships based on our employment status and the family law order that we have with our case. So we may have the ability to take children as tax deductions or exemptions on our taxes. We may be able to do head of household. We may be able to apply for the federal benefits for the unearned income tax. So all of those things may be available to us and may be affected by becoming unemployed and not having income, or by receiving a fairly large amount of federally sponsored additional income that may have been more than we might have made if we were employed. So don't think that the tax refunds you got last year will be the tax refunds you will get next year. And pay attention to the fluctuations in your income and how those might affect both your right to take those tax benefits or how much you might be owing in taxes. But the two that have really been concerning to me is when you have a custody or support order. In Indiana, our orders are often based on the employment of the parents, and schedules are often determined on both the employment schedule of the parents and the school year. If anyone can tell me when last school year actually ended, let me know. And if anyone can tell me when it's really starting now, the reality is that the dates have moved. We went to virtual. We may have to go back to virtual again. We have some parents who are on virtual, even though we've gone back to in-person in some cases. So the relationship we have from when our children are home with us and when our children are in a place of education may impact our ability to work our ability to return to work if our employer suggests that. And it may need modification in family court to address the real outcome of that. The other thing that employment and unemployment insurance can affect with family law relationships is your child support amount. If you are either the recipient of child support on behalf of a minor child, or you're the payer of child support for your minor child who's primarily lives with another parent, the amount you pay in child support is based on your income. If your income is changing constantly because of the varying levels of unemployment benefits that are available to you, you may be able to return to court to lower your lower your family, your support amount for family law, or the other spouse may be able to take you back to family court in order to increase it if you're making more. And it's going to be so challenging to deal with that because people's income from one month to the next may be radically different. So those are just things to take into account and think about. When you have challenges in any of these areas, there are lots of good resources. In fact, I've been telling people, just Google federal labor COVID poster. And up will come this really wonderful document that explains all the benefits that are available in terms of that. And then there are all the wonderful resources that you have on the Arts Commission's thing for artists. You have wonderful question and answer, most frequently asked questions available on the DWD site, which is just ian.gov/DWD. And they have a really good detailed frequently asked questions section there for both employees considering applying for unemployment insurance and employers who are dealing with the fact that they don't understand what in the world's going on because it's changing every few weeks. So those are the basics that I wanted to go over. This has been a really challenging time for people, especially artists that can't get their products or their work or their art out into the public. Those that do performance art are very limited. Those who are trying to sell in a variety of places, the places they sell may not be open, or if they are open, may be limited in the amount of time or space they can devote. This is a really tough time. So if you have been successful in navigating the unemployment system, good for you, and know that there may be additional benefits just a few weeks away. Keep going back to those websites to see whether or not that new program that the state is working with the federal government on comes online. If it doesn't, we will continue to always have state-based unemployment insurance for those who qualify. And those frequently asked questions and the resources that are available on the IAC site can give you good guidance on that. If you are denied unemployment assistance, please feel free to contact the telephone number, by the way, which if you're watching this is 812-402-6303 on Tuesdays or Thursdays between 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. 11 p.m., God, that's too long. 9 a.m. to 11 a.m., not all day. 2 hours on Tuesday, 2 hours on Thursday, and you'll be able to speak with someone who can do an intake for you to hopefully get you to the right place to get you assistance with how you deal with appeals and other issues. So with that, Paige, if you've been monitoring things or other things, I am happy to answer your questions because you always have a good one, and or answer any other things or clarify. And by the way, thanks whoever put it in the chat box. You don't apply every week. You just have to recertify every week after you've applied.
Yeah, Anna's incredibly attentive. It's always impressive. She has a wonderful attention span, unlike yours truly. So one of the questions that came in, I'm not sure you can answer it or not, but it's with regard to those folks that have mixed income. They're an artist and they sell their work and they make their money that way, but or they have a 1099, but they also have a W-2. How do they navigate that? Do you have any ideas on what you would recommend or what the legal stance is on that?
Well, I will tell you that's really not a legal issue as much as it is a real challenge just logistically. And let me do a couple of things with that. First of all, I would never on a lawyer will ever suggest that anyone listening to this or watching this would ever not completely document all their income and not pay every cent of their taxes. The reality is, however, the documentation of some income from some artists is especially challenging. For example, they may sell a piece at a gallery for $100, but the gallery takes a portion of that as a commission. So did they sell it for $100 or did they sell it for $30 because they took a 30, So even getting good documentation for some income, which you have to verify if you do have an actual evaluation of your eligibility, can be really challenging. So the first thing I encourage all artists to do is if, for example, the only documentation they can have is the sheet from the gallery saying, here's your check for this month, we sold 3 of your pieces, that's the net. That's not the gross. The artist is paying the gallery to display the work. So in reality, when you sell a painting for $100 at a gallery, you receive $100 of income, but you got $70 in actual cash. Kind of like when we get paid by our employer, right? I get paid $100, but my check's only $84 because we take FICA and Social Security and everything out of it. Well, my income's still $100. So what can screw people up that have 1099s, that have other sources beyond just a good old W-2? Wouldn't it be wonderful if we all just got that same simple document? But for artists, we have to be really careful that we aren't portraying our income in ways that will get us denied or show that we've got our income put in wrong. Because what can happen? Let's say, for example, I'm an artist and I don't know these rules, right? So the document says how much you receive. Well, as a solo practitioner, I got $70. But in reality, they got 100, but they paid $30 in expenses to the gallery to hang the work and sell it. So if that eventually gets evaluated and I get hauled in, they say, well, show us, well, no, sir, you actually got $100. The fact you paid the gallery, good for you. You made the choice to, instead of standing on the street corner and getting the whole $100, you chose to pay a gallery to do it for you. Then you get a ding from your unemployment and have to pay part of it back. So, those would be things. Now, the trouble with that, of course, is that it's just like filing your taxes. We don't know. I can't tell you. And by the way, those of you looking me in the eye out there in Facebook world going, oh, crap, I've been reporting my income incorrectly every year. Well, everybody does. And by the way, everyone also claims the suit they gave to Goodwill was still worth $300. Don't beat yourself up. We all do the best we can. The trouble is in most of the cases, like with their annual taxes and things like that, there's really no evaluation. We're doing the best we can. And the chance of getting audited is like 0.000. The trouble with this is an artist that has mixed income is going to be a flag. Right? If you just put in one employer, here's how much I make, all that's verified in the system. All of our W-2 information is totally available now. They can verify everything, pushing buttons. The algorithms can do all that. But when you're an unusual person where you've got a 1099 and you've got some solo practitioner money and you've got a W-2 because you work part-time waiting tables, and then you're a tipped person because you pick up some catering so that you can make enough money to do your art, it is a big red flag. So if you have that type of circumstance, do your best to look at the resources that are available. Google, how do I put in all my stuff when I got mixed income for unemployment? You'll be amazed. You are not the only person right now facing these issues. I was shocked when I was putting all this stuff together. I was shocked how much Google helped me because everyone's asking these questions. And that is not an endorsement, by the way. I should do the legal thing. That is not an endorsement of Google. You may use any search engine of your choice.
That's really helpful. I had a quick question about when an employer might dispute the unemployment. At any time, would me, if I were the unemployed person, need an attorney to help me navigate that, or what would you suggest?
Certainly if it's a close case. So let me give you guidance on that. When we are let go from employment for any reason, whether it was COVID-related shutdown or whether they fired us because we're a terrible employee, it's an indictment of our humanity. you know, so many of us define who we are through our work.
Mhm.
Artists are probably the quintessential example of that. So when someone lets us go and takes our employment away from us, it's very emotionally difficult to deal with, regardless of the thing. We're losing our income, perhaps. So a lot of times when you're in a dispute with an employer and you believe that they let you go, but they believe they fired you, there can be real dispute with that. You know, I called my employer and I told them that my baby had COVID. I thought, so I stayed home, and they told me if I didn't come to work, there wasn't going to be a job because I was out of sick leave. Well, you think you lost your job because of COVID, and because of the fact that you couldn't go to work. They believe you are an absentee and they fired you because you had excessive absences. Now, you might win under some of the new rules, but your employer is going to say, no, she didn't come to work. We offered her a job. She had her job. She refused to come. If it turns out your kid didn't have COVID and you didn't go to work, you lose your job. So there are going to be some times where there will be disputes, and there may be legitimate disputes. If you're in one of those seeking the guidance of, and this is the real challenge, of course, if you are low income and you qualify for civil legal aid assistance, welcome to the worst time to try to get civil legal aid assistance in the entire history of the planet, because you and every other person's facing eviction, every person facing foreclosure, all suddenly are going to try to get free legal help from the same three people that were there when we had a 3% unemployment rate. So I don't want to give people the false hope that there's going to be lots of just, you know, free attorneys dripping off trees, waiting to appeal unemployment cases, because they're also under a terrible deadline time-wise. Seek legal help if you can. If you can afford it, pay an attorney to do at least your hearing. There's this wonderful thing. We've changed our ethics rules in Indiana to allow what's called discrete task representation. What that means is, in the past, our ethics rules really anticipated that an attorney would take a case from start to finish, and there was an entry and an exit. And what that meant is attorneys, yeah, I need a $2,500 retainer, I'm going to do your whole matter. The whole model that we based our services was on that. What we've done is we've changed our ethics rules to allow, hey, you want to hire an attorney to do a 1-hour hearing and that's all you want to hire him for, and you don't want to hire him to prep and you don't want to hire him afterwards, you just want somebody there to help make sure you're not taken advantage of with ethics rules and stuff. Our rules now allow that. I explained that it's basically like those going to the CVS or the little strip mall and there's suddenly a little medical clinic thing, like a little minute clinic. Mm-hmm. That's what this is. So instead of going to the full doctor relationship and having to pay that whole thing, you can go to the minute clinic for law. And that is, there are lawyers, if you call them and you say, I can't afford $2,500. Would you listen to the hearing for $200? Attorneys have the ethical ability to do that now. We didn't used to. So I encourage people, if you can't afford, you can't get into the legal aid system and you can't afford a full attorney, think about the possibility that attorney that turns you down because you can't afford the $2,500, say to them, can you do the hearing for $150? Mm. A lot of attorneys, by the way, that's meaningful business.
That's good.
You know, so, but again, this is going to be a just world of challenge for all of us for about the next 6 or 9 months until we get some type of way to get the numbers to a reasonable place where we're not dealing with trying to squish. You know, we took a system that was taking 6,000 or 8,000 people a month to 300,000 or 400,000 a month, and it was the same pipe. You know, the water didn't move any faster. It just had a whole lot of more water to go through. And we're all going to be facing that. So, I don't want to be depressing to those folks who are watching, and I hope getting educated like all of you are doing. I mean, you're taking an hour out of your day to try to better understand these systems and navigate them more effectively, know whether you need to get in them or not. I mean, you know, you've obviously invested in yourself in that way, but just know that we're all struggling. Those who are the helpers and those are the people who need help. There just aren't enough resources.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's good to know that you can, try to get the attorney just for like an hour. That's extremely helpful. I wasn't aware of that. And because, putting them on retainer or what, Oh my gosh, that's really scary, particularly if you're dealing with unemployment. I
Oh
mean,
my
it's not
goodness.
like there's just scads of cash lying around to help you out. So,
When that's what
um,
you think about, who is the least likely person to have money to hire a lawyer? Well, it's the person just lost her job. So it's a terrible reality that, and that's why employment law feels so biased for employers. I mean, the law is really not biased for employers, but it feels that way because the employer can always hire an attorney. But a lot of times the unemployed person can't. And that means you're often dealing in these systems. If you have to appeal your unemployment denial, you're often doing it yourself and you're often doing it against the attorney for the employer. It feels unfair, which is why I'm so glad that in our system in Indiana, the system puts the burden on the employer to prove the case rather than the employee. That's one of the few benefits.
that's good to know. Looks like there was a comment in Facebook about an artist doing a small gift and getting paid. It's like $100. Would that same amount be deducted from my next unemployment payment?
That is a great question. You have to, when you are on unemployment, you are supposed to report any employment income. You do that in your weekly certification. It will not deduct. I don't believe it's a dollar for dollar. I don't know what the formula is. It depends on what amount of unemployment you're getting, which was based on your old employment level, but it will have an impact on the amount. That's why the range goes from 50 to 390, because it's based on past thing and what you're doing now. So I believe there is an incentive to still take your $100, meaning that you will not lose it dollar for dollar, because then there's no incentive to work. Right? If you can just sit at home and get the whole 390, why take the 100 if they're just going to give me 290? And there will be a delay because they won't match up week to week, because the amount you get for unemployment next week is based on what you did last week and other things. I will encourage you, and again, this is the lawyer. You should always be honest and report your income as required by state and federal law to make sure that you are complying with all of those things.
Well done. We don't have any other questions. We have a few minutes left. If you wouldn't mind, just go ahead and let us know again what those hours are and the times that you're available. I think Tuesdays and Thursdays, you said, if you wouldn't mind repeating that.
And if you forget this or don't remember or don't write it down, if you look at the invitation for all of these webinars, this information is on there as well. And what we do is we have someone available to do intake. And all that is just taking your name and contact information down and the basics of your question so that we can figure out where to allocate it and where to direct it so we can get someone who can do it. For example, we had an arts organization that we spoke to this week. We were talking about reopening issues, which we did a webinar on 3 weeks ago, and we can get that to the right person and the right resources. We had someone call today with an unemployment issue. We've had people calling with landlord-tenant issues because of gallery concerns of being able to pay rent because their artists aren't making any income and selling product. So it's all over the place. But Tuesdays and Thursdays from 9 a.m. to 11 Central Time. I always give Evansville first. We called that slow time when I was growing up. Or if fast time, which is Eastern time, that's 10 in the morning until noon your time. And that number again, if you want to write it down, is 812-402-6303. We're trying to get a web presence so that we can do, we don't like to in the law do web portals as much because we don't like you putting your private information in non-secured delivery systems for the protection of your confidentiality of your legal issue. So that's why we all like phones.
I was wondering about that. I was like, why is it? Okay.
We lawyers very rarely like folks to submit all kinds of private things about their legal issues. And the reason for that is because there's the potential we may be representing the other person on the other side. And you may very well give us all the information we're not supposed to be allowed to hear. And that's why lawyers are very hesitant to use online tools.
Interesting. Wow. That's fascinating. Well, I think that's it for us today. And Scott, I think we're good to go. I just want to thank you again for all your time and expertise and fun and fabulous metaphors. All these kids coming into a pool at the same time. This brought me back to Kingston, summer in Kingston Elementary School when I went to the pool. But I know that this is our last webinar with you. Certainly, folks, if you are looking for help and we hear from you and you're like, we really need more information about this or that, let us know. We're happy to bring Scott back on to address any of those common concerns so that we could address them for everybody at one time. Happy to do that. Anna put a plug in our comment, and I think it also posted on Facebook, that our friend and partner Elaine Luttrell from Luttrell is CPA. She's a financial counselor, and she focuses on artists and arts organization, and she's still offering Coping with COVID financial support group that meets Mondays at 3 p.m. Eastern. And you could just Google that, Elaine Luttrell, Luttrell. She's fantastic and fun and very upbeat, and is happy to help you through these times as well. Everyone, thank you. Thank you, Scott, and members of the team. If there's anything I'm missing, please chime in. Otherwise, we appreciate your time.